10 years ago, the people of this country voted to leave the EU.
We want our country back. We don't want to stay members of the European Union.
I believe the choice is between being an even greater Britain inside a reformed EU or a great leap into the unknown.
I will be advocating vote leave.
June the 23rd needs to become a national bank holiday, and we will call it Independence Day.
The British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
The Brexit years have cast a very long shadow over both politics and the economy.
Leaving the European Union gave us the freedom to do things differently.
Now, Remainers contend that the UK is poorer, cut off from its biggest trading partner.
One thing is abundantly clear. It has cost us hugely.
In fact, 10 years after, I can repeat that Brexit has been and it still is a lose-lose game.
Ten years to the day after Britain voted to leave the European Union, was Project Fear right? Here's what Remain's frontman, the then Chancellor George Osborne, said a week before the vote.
Quitting the EU would mean less money, billions less. And as the economy shrinks, so too would the cash that the country has to spend. It's a lose-lose situation for British families, and we should not risk it. And if you doubt it, look what's happening on the financial markets.
The Treasury predicted the UK economy would shrink 6%. Today, the current Chancellor, we're not sure for how much longer, says actually the hit was even worse.
It's 10 years today since the Brexit referendum, but the economic impact from the deal negotiated by the previous government is stark. Indeed, recent studies indicate its impact could be as great as 8% reduction in GDP.
That's over £3,000 per person. And that's before we even get into the non-appearance of the £350 million a week Brexit dividend that had been promised for the NHS. Of course, the Brexiteers, Nigel Farage chief among them, say we haven't seen the land of Brexit milk and honey because useless politicians, his words not mine, cocked it all up. Here's what the man he blames for it all promised us a month before the vote.
Thanks to the referendum given to this country by David Cameron, we find that a door has magically opened in our lives. We can see the sunlit meadows beyond.
Well, Boris, it's dazzling sunshine outside right now, but we probably can't thank Brexit for that. Undeterred, Johnson this week celebrated taking back control, doing a Facebook video in front of a bunch of flags, accusing a zombified, useless, do-nothing government of failing to make the most of Brexit freedoms. So the zombie's leaving number 10 next month, and his likely successor seems to display a very Johnsonian tendency to have his cake and eat it. Here he is last year expressing a desire to unpick the vote.
Long term, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say it. I want to rejoin. I hope in my lifetime I see this country rejoin the European Union. I'm absolutely clear about that.
The EU's former Brexit negotiator said today the UK could have a fast-track route back. Doesn't look like that'll be needed, though, because Andy Burnham's changed his mind. Here he is just a few weeks ago.
My view is that Brexit has been damaging, but I also believe the last thing we should do right now is rerun those arguments.
So that's that. Forget Burnhamism, it's cakeism. But perhaps a PM who likes to be liked might be swayed by changing public opinion. A clear majority think the UK was wrong to leave. A slightly less clear majority think Britain should rejoin. Then again, confronted with the prospect of another angry, divisive referendum, you might just come over all Brenda from Bristol and conclude, not another one. Well, let's speak now to our guests on the sofa. Our first guest, the former Sainsbury's CEO, Justin King, and he's joined by the former Chancellor, Sir Jeremy Hunt, and Reform's Layla Cunningham. Well, Justin, first, let's talk about Brexit, because, 10 years on to the day, talk about in your sector, retail, because research has suggested that food barriers have cost us billions. Are you confident that food prices would be lower if we hadn't Brexited?
Yes, I am. Look, I was a Remainer, and it is 10 years on. But I think, that montage you just showed really makes the point, which is that we do have to move on from a decision that was taken. And I think towards the end, The caption was something along the lines of the majority of people think it was a mistake. I do think it was a mistake, and I think the numbers profoundly demonstrate that it was. I, as a supermarket CEO, as I was at the time, was saying it would massively disrupt our supply chains and make prices higher, and it did, and it has.
Well, did it as badly as you expected? I mean, were you part of Project Fear?
Well, I think Project Fear was simply an honest articulation by me and others of what we feared would happen, and in large part, it did. But
so you're pretty clear that the cost, when you look at the Treasury, what the Chancellor said today, you are very clear that Brexit has cost us dearly.
It has, but I think this is not the conversation we need to be having, because the second part of that caption was that the majority of people, and I would include myself in it, don't think rerunning that debate now is in the interests of the country. And you saw Burnham say that he hoped in his lifetime, well, he's a relatively young man, that could be 30 or 40 or 50 years hence. I think we owe it to ourselves to focus on the here and now, focus on the next 5 to 10 years. He may well have that opportunity if he becomes the Prime Minister. And it needs to start with a positive mindset. I think, if there was one thing I would criticise about Keir Starmer's leadership, very publicly.
Just
one. Well, but I'm allowed to pick the one, and I'm going to pick. It was the negativism from day one, right? He won a landslide majority. There was no doubt the country thought that the previous government had come to the end of its path. And we should start with a positive outlook. And I hope that if it is indeed Andy Burnham, the starting point is that we talk about what we can do from here. We are, after all, where we are. And I think that it is just very unhelpful to rerun all of those debates and all those old criticisms. And, Boris Johnson with his little 10-year claiming victory for himself, if only other people had done different things. And Nigel Farage, it sounded like likewise. And I think we need to focus on the fact that this is still a great country with great potential.
You still believe that?
I do, and I think we have incredible potential, and some of it is liberated by us being outside of the European Union. I think there are lots of downsides from being outside the European. I won't change my mind on that. But there are some things we can liberate, and we need to grasp those and many other opportunities besides.
So, for example, on AI, which is the example Boris Johnson uses, or, we saw what happened in the pandemic, that we were able to move faster on the vaccines. You think that we can benefit from Brexit? Are useless politicians holding us back? Have they been so far?
Well, it is undoubtedly the case that we should have only one political system within which to make systems and decisions, and clearly that wasn't the case inside the European Union. So our ability to move at pace, to set our own rules and to work within those, within the context of whatever world and European norms are, because we want a bit of trade with the world and trade with Europe as well, must be an advantage. And we have the CCOM, we still have a fantastic academic sector, we still have a very productive market. It's not the best place to raise capital for AI-related projects, but it should still be a great place. And we can move at great pace and take a lead, and we can take a lead on issues like health as well. We have this incredible database born of our National Health Service, which could be the seed corn for a dominant position in AI-related health, a dominant position in all of the things that knowledge economy can bring to us. So I'm a very... I hope it's clear. I'm very positive. Yes, bless you. About the future prospects of our company. Was it at a particular moment? Did I say something that upset you so much?
You know what? Seeing as Jeremy has sneezed opportunely, I was going to leave you out of the discussion until the end. But let's bring you two in on Brexit, and I want to talk about the wider economy in a second and what it might look like under Andy Burnham. But let's bring Layla. I want to bring in you first, actually, on the Brexit benefits. Is it the fact that, do you agree with Nigel Farage that politicians basically made a hash of doing Brexit? What would you say to what you've just heard from Justin?
I agree with some of what Justin said. I voted for Brexit. I voted because I think politicians who dictate what happens in this country should be accountable to British voters, and if I don't like what they say, I should be able to vote them out. You couldn't do that with the European Commission. And so for me, it was a question of sovereignty, and I think a lot of people didn't vote on economic lines, they voted for other reasons. And he's right in that it gave us so many freedoms. We could control who came in. We ended EU free movement.
But the argument is we didn't.
Well, the argument is that we replaced EU free movement with mass migration from non-EU countries. And I think people didn't vote to swap one immigration system for another. And that was, sorry to say, Jeremy, to lay blame on the Conservatives. And they didn't use the freedoms that we had. We could have made our own laws, our own regulation, our own trade deals. But you almost feel that the governments didn't believe in Britain enough, Jeremy, to push that through to the max.
You were part of the government that mucked it up.
Well,
let me answer the bigger question. We certainly got immigration policy wrong in the period since 2020. I fully accept that. I'm actually, interestingly, in a different position to Justin, because I also voted to remain. But if we had a referendum today, I wouldn't. And the reason is because, firstly, I have never doubted that a country the size of the UK, the 6th largest economy in the world, soon the 5th largest economy in the world, can be a successful independent country in the way that Canada, Australia, Japan can all be. But if you look at the UK very specifically, our big industries, the big white hope for the British economy, which is our tech sector, which is the 3rd largest after the United States and China, they don't want to go back into the EU because they look at the very heavy-handed way that the EU is regulating AI, and they are worried. The city, which is very important for chancellors because tax revenues from financial services fund about half the cost of the NHS. They were very staunchly in favour of Remain. Now they're not, because actually they don't want to come again under the yoke of Brussels regulation and bureaucracy. So Justin, I think it would be an act of self-harm to go back.
Do you agree with that?
I don't think there's much distance between me and Jeremy, really, because fundamentally, I guess my point is we have paid the price. We have paid the price.
And you accept that.
But we start from here, right? And all the points that Jeremy makes are right. And because ultimately, the thing we have bought ourselves, because we've paid the price, the opportunity to do, is to do the next period of time in a different way.
But just, we will never be an AI, we will never realise our AI potential unless we have cheaper energy. AI relies on energy. We need hyperscalers, we need data centres. And I've spoken to people who provide those, in America, and we're not even on the map because energy costs are just too high. And it's all about compute power. Data centres are like the new oil rigs. Compute power is like the new oil. And sadly, we don't have that. And I don't know if we ever will in the pursuit of net zero.
Scale back net zero. We're in the middle of a heat wave, which is exacerbated by climate change.
I've got this horrible feeling you're going to find sort of various versions of agreement amongst the three of us. Look, I agree completely.
Okay.
We can't compete in energy-intensive industries with energy that's 4 times the cost of our the countries that we're competing with. So, fundamentally, our energy policy has been narrow, focused on a single idea. Fundamentally, do I think we have to be on a journey to net zero? Absolutely, we do.
But slow that journey down.
But we're now almost standing alone in the single-minded pursuit in something that is damaging our economy and the prospects of our young, in particular, today. And there are things that we can do about that. And fundamentally, we have to open our mind to a different route to net zero, which isn't, frankly, self-harm, which is what it currently is.
I mean, Cathy, the day that Elon Musk IPO'd his SpaceX, first £1 trillion IPO or trillionaire, our government was discussing how to limit the amount of time we can use our tower rails. Or underfloor, but it's just a proxy. It's a proxy on the state of the country. We are regulating growth out of our country.
All I was going to say is there's a very good book out now called Can We Be Rich Again? I'm trying to think who wrote it, but there's a whole chapter...
I think that might have been you.
There's a whole chapter on energy policy. And actually...
The author was the Chancellor.
Or a former Chancellor. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but anyway, free copies of the panel.
For us.
But no, well, we can be rich again. But energy policy is very important. Actually, Justin and Layla are absolutely right. But you don't have to tear up net zero to get there. I'll give you an example. One total madness in our energy policy, for which the governments I was part of do bear some responsibility, is that we have the 4 largest offshore wind farms in the world. That is a brilliant thing to have. It's renewable energy. But half the time, we have to switch them off because the national grid can't absorb the electricity they produce on windy days. But we still have to pay for that electricity, and that's one of the reasons our bills are too high. Now, getting the national grid to be able to absorb that capacity is a total no-brainer when it comes to energy policy.
You know the hindrance. So when I've gone up and down the country, nobody wants pylons in their backyard. And pylons are the only way to upgrade the grid, unless you do it under the ground in the sea, which is extortionate. So you need a bunch of pylons across the country, which
I suspect
destroy our
countryside. Aren't that keen on pylons in their back gardens.
No, exactly. So nobody wants them.
OK, I just want to... I'm just going to come back to you, Justin, on the sort of broader political point, because we're talking about Andy Burnham and what he might be like as Prime Minister. Just leaving Brexit. Let's move on from Brexit for now. I'm sure we're all relieved about that. Andy Burnham has said that he wants to unwind 40 years of neoliberalism. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that this sort of idea promulgated by Andy and his supporters that the last 40 years have failed, and I think that's wrong. I am old enough to remember the last time the state thought it could do better than private enterprise. It's called the 1970s. I'm in no rush to go back there. I do not have any fond memories of switching lights off at 10 o'clock at night because the electricity was going to be cut off, of not being able to get a phone connected, of trains that didn't run, let alone run on time, and infrastructure that was not invested in. The state should not be taking the part of private enterprise, and that part of Andy's credo, which appears to still be part of his credo, which is there's lots of things the state can do better than private enterprise, I would disagree strongly with.
Well, let me just read you what he said about what happened under Thatcher at the end of the 70s and into the 80s. He said that Thatcher's deregulation and privatisation left people and businesses paying way over the odds for the essentials and are the root cause of today's cost of living crisis. Can you put him right?
Well, again, the talk about the cost of living crisis, if you take a 40-year view, which is what he's arguing, that across wider society, the vast majority of people are better off than they were 40 years ago. It is just not true to say that everyone's worse off than they were 40 years ago.
Home ownership's worse off.
Home
ownership is worse off.
But no society more... Look,
but
take
home
more
ownership
recent
is a fundamental
I
British
agree
dream, and 30 and 40-year-olds don't own a home. We don't have a state that can provide for them.
Supermarket goods...
That's a different question. Yeah. Look, I also happen to agree that there has been a massive transfer of wealth from the young to the old, that our young's futures have been mortgaged by policy, and I think we need to bite the bullet on it. I mean, I think the pension triple lock has to be part of the government reforming what the state pays for. The whole environmental cost that we just touched on is essentially us having mortgaged our young's future. So, no, I don't disagree with the basic idea that there's been this sort of horrible journey for the young, and they can't today expect the kind of increase in net wealth that we, the older in the room, I'm the oldest here, I think, have been able to enjoy. But the idea that the last 40 years is a failed project economically for the vast majority in this country is just not true.
Also, and so, sorry, I just want to follow up on that because, you know, he's talked about the prospect of a wealth tax, and he said there's definitely a case for the return of a 50% top rate of tax for the wealthiest. Is that fair enough when younger people, as you say, are struggling to make ends meet?
Well, but you just said definitely case. No, there isn't. I mean, the state today takes the highest proportion of earnings in this country since the Second World War. I think it's about 37%. And there is legion evidence, actual evidence and also theoretical evidence that the state runs out in the mid to high 30s anyway, because in the end, those that he wishes to tax more are more mobile now than they've ever been. And as we've seen with the non-dom change, now I think it's generally accepted that far from raising more money for the Treasury, it's actually cost us money. So we have to recognise that the rich do and should pay more. The wealthy today pay a higher proportion of what the state takes than they ever have done. You know, if you take income, simple, the top 1% account for 12% of earnings in this country and 25% of tax in this country. So the wealthy are paying more. Of course, they can always pay more, but if you just put up the high rates of tax, again, we're going back to the 1970s, the people and the money you're trying to tax leaves. And really importantly, we want that money staying in this country, being invested in our future. And the structure of our economy today, even, you know, our savings ratio has rocketed. I think we're saving 4 times now as a society, as people, as everyday citizens, as a proportion of our income than we have done if you take, say, a 20-year view.
So you worried about
encouraging that back into being invested for the future rather than squirreled away where it's not productive. I imagine there's a chapter in your book on it.
Most certainly is.
I'll get a follow-up from you in a minute, but just one final word from you. Are you worried about an Andy Burnham premiership then? Well,
look, I think the political point is that we have established, Gordon Brown, Richie Sunak, you could argue the same, that a mid-term switch of Prime Minister undertaken by the political party in power to a Prime Minister that essentially has stuck with the manifesto commitments, has political legitimacy. When we see a Prime Minister try to go to a different place, as we saw with Liz Truss, for example, very quickly that legitimacy evaporates. So the political question for Andy Burnham is he broadly going to stick with the policy thrust that the government in power today was elected on? I don't think he has the political legitimacy to tear up that agenda and come with a new one without a new vote.
Right, so if he wants to do a new one, he's got to have a general election.
If it's a fundamental shift away from the policy manifesto that this government was elected on. Now, I think the one thing I see positive in Andy is you see somebody who absolutely does focus on the positives. He focuses on the power of possibility. He claims a strong track record of working with private enterprise, with for-profit enterprise in Manchester. That's very different from doing it in the country, where you also have the tax-raising powers, because he didn't fundamentally have tax-raising powers as a mayor. So the jury, of course, is out. But my starting point would be, if he seizes this opportunity to move from the negative, to focus on the positive, to focus on the things that we can do well, and to empower private enterprise in this country to create wealth, because I fundamentally believe in one thing, which is we grow our way out of this problem. And the problem of the last 10 years, which is where you started, is that this country has shrunk in real terms, not grown. And most of the problems we're reaping today is of economy going in the wrong direction over the long term.
That is just not true, Justin. It is not true. The economy has not shrunk in the last 10 years. That's absolutely...
In relative terms.
We're 6% smaller than it would have been if we hadn't Brexit.
No, it's grown in actual terms. Relative to what has it shrunk?
Private.
What does it shrunk?
Okay,
let's do absolutes and relatives. What has it shrunk relative to?
Well, I think if you index it for inflation, what are average
No.
incomes?
It's grown in real terms. GDP per head, I know this because I was chancellor.
What's GDP per head today?
It's between 2010 and 2024, it went up by 14%.
And how much of that is contributed by the state?
Well, the state is about 20% of our overall output, so most of that is not the state. But look, is that fast enough? No.
We'll agree on that.
This is where, well, no, you just got to withdraw the absolute nonsense claim that we've shrunk. It's a typical bit of... I'm sorry, it's a little bit of...
Have we grown in the last 10 years?
Yes, we have. We've grown, and GDP per head has grown by 14%.
But people don't feel that.
Exactly, and that's why we've got to do a lot better. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that what Justin said was nonsense, and I'm not even letting him get away. Look, I want to comment on what Andy Burnham said, because I hope that he was doing it to court votes in Makerfield or with Labour Party members. Because
on the wealth tax and so on.
On that stuff. And I hope he doesn't really mean it, because it is a fundamentally, absolutely disastrously wrong analysis of the situation we're in. And let's look at the countries that have been growing. Have they been the ones that have been rejecting neoliberalism? No, they've been the ones that have been embracing markets all around the world.
And rejecting net zero.
Well, in some of them, not all of them, actually.
No country that's pursuing net zero aggressively.
But anyway, let me make my point later. Yeah, thank you. But, you know, if you look at the places in the slow lane, it's the places that have been rejecting neoliberalism, e.g. the EU. And so I think we've got to be very, very careful. Now, that period, most of that period that Andy Burnham was being very dismissive about, we were actually growing at about 2.5% a year. Right. That means that our GDP was doubling every 3 decades. Most people are pretty happy with that now. Since the financial crisis, things have started to go wrong. And so I think you've got to be really careful. If you, as Rachel Reeves has found, if you embark on policies that drive rich people away, you drive up unemployment, you drive down investment, you drive down growth, and please learn from what happened in the last couple of years.
Well, because you drove away on Donald.
I'm happy to agree with what Jeremy just said.
Justin, it's been great to have you on the sofa. Thank you very much, and it's been great to have a former Chancellor to fact-check you. We'll do that again. Thank you.
We're both former CEO, former Chancellor, and current.
Former, not much.
And we'll come back to you. Thank you very much. Now, after yesterday's drama at Westminster, the two main players met today for the first time, with Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer holding what you can only imagine were delicate negotiations away from Downing Street. Andy Burnham now faces the prospect of becoming Prime Minister, promising radical change, but potentially hamstrung by decisions made by Sir Keir Starmer and his Chancellor. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
My ministers will introduce legislation.
Doesn't he feel like the chump now? Just 42 days since King Charles set out his government's agenda. Look at all of these bills. But that was Keir Starmer's plan, and it's all changed now. Take just this bill, for instance, the Education for All bill. That's the one that contains SEND special educational need reform. Is Andy Burnham going to keep that, change it, sack Bridget Phillipson? We just don't know. And what about this one? The European Partnership Bill, which creates a common agricultural area with the EU. They've cancelled the big EU summit where it was going to be agreed, so where does it leave that? Or will there be actually less change with the new government? As here is the King sounding a bit like Andy Burnham.
They will deploy the power of an active state in partnership with business.
The truth is, we just don't know. But we'll get our first glimpse next week when Andy Burnham gives a speech on the economy and devolution. Now, he says he's going to stick with the fiscal rules, but somebody who is working with him says he could still end up borrowing a lot more.
I've tried to encourage this government to be bolder about. I think the second part of the fiscal rule on borrowing to invest, I think that could be explored a lot more and not in a way that freaks out the financial markets.
Does he have that clarity of vision? That's a big, bold thing to rip up the fiscal rules. He said he's not going to do it.
I don't think he'd necessarily have to rip up the fiscal rules.
But change
I think
them.
you just need to be bolder about borrowing to invest.
And here's what it could be spent on.
If you borrow for things that have really positive multiplier effects, my own subjective example would be, I'll give you two. One would be for Northern Powerhouse Rail, which I've always thought way more important than HS2, but let's see what the real experts say transparently. And secondly, things like investing in preventive health issues as opposed to treating that like everything else. And I think if that's done in a really powerful way, it would make investors think the country...
Well, sorry, there was a little technical problem there, but Sam is here on the sofa, so he's going to be able to update us on what happened there. But also the newest Defence Secretary, Dan Jarvis, has been speaking this evening about the challenges of the Defence Investment Plan that caused his predecessor to resign.
I know the immense weight of responsibility for every single member of the armed forces and their families that I now carry. And I know that I need to get them what they want. And I am utterly determined to make sure that I do. Now, it is, of course, a matter of public record why my predecessor and friend John Healey is not delivering these remarks. I accepted this job with full awareness of the task before me, and my priority is to get the Defence Investment Plan done, but not at any cost. I have a responsibility to get it right.
Well, let's bring in our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes. Deborah, what did you make of what you heard?
Well, he used that phrase quite a lot, that he was determined to get it right. And he's clearly under a lot of pressure to get it right while Sir Keir Starmer is still Prime Minister, because he did say that while there is going to be a change in Prime Minister, there is no change in the desire to get this Defence Investment Plan out before the NATO summit in Ankara on the 7th and 8th of July, which is just before all of this leadership change is expected to happen. And so there is a lot of concern, though, amongst the military that if you push out a plan that's endorsed by the old Prime Minister, how is it going to be seen as credible and trusted on by industry and the armed forces if it's not endorsed by whoever comes in after Sir Keir Starmer? So there's a lot of questions about that. And I think the key thing that I took away from this, I asked Dan Jarvis a question, because he was obviously delivering those remarks at the Land Warfare Conference. I asked him, is he pushing for more money? Because obviously that was a thing that John Healey resigned over in protest. He couldn't get enough money from the Chancellor and from the Prime Minister to fund this Defence Investment Plan. And I asked Dan Jarvis, if he didn't get enough money, would he delay publishing this document until a new Prime Minister is in town? He didn't address that last bit, but he did talk about how he is having very constructive conversations with the Chancellor. He said he's been meeting with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor about this. He was asked by other journalists too about this exact issue. He says that there are still more conversations to be had. He's determined to succeed, and we all took away from that as signalling he is absolutely trying to get more money. The question will be, is it going to be enough? And even if he thinks it is enough, if they do publish this plan before Sir Keir Starmer steps down, is it actually going to mean anything when the new Prime Minister comes and takes a look at it?
Indeed. Well, fascinating. Deborah, thank you very much for that update. Let's go back to the sofa. Sam Coates has joined us along with Jeremy and Layla, who's still there. Sam, you were sort of cut off in your prime there, but there's a right row going on, isn't there, over this Defence Investment Plan? Just put us in the picture.
So I think it's quite complicated. One of the big things that happened today, and it was a little bit below the surface, but the Cabinet Secretary, Antonio Romeo, wrote to all government departments to say, we're going to pause all announcements because we know that there's going to be a change of Prime Minister. We know it's likely to be Andy Burnham. And until that point, there's not going to be anything significant discussed. Now, clearly, some business of government has to take place. But what's fascinating to me is I think there has to be something said before a British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, goes to the NATO summit at the start of July. But I suspect that's not the full picture. I suspect that what Dan Jarvis and Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves will have agreed is essentially a holding package. But we're going to have to wait a little bit further until Andy Burnham comes in and then reassesses the picture and decides how big a priority is defence, how much money does he have to spend, and what is he going to do to prioritise it?
Jeremy, let me bring you in, because you wrote a very interesting column a few weeks ago in the Sunday Times talking about how you, if you were Chancellor, would cut benefits to pay for a defence uplift. And you pointed out that if you claim the three main benefits available to people out of work, you can get up to £49,000 a year against £23,000 if you're working full-time on the living wage. But it would take time to make the welfare cuts that you were advocating to pay for defence, wouldn't it?
Yes, I mean, those numbers, just to be clear, you would have to be earning a salary of £46,000 if you were in central London to get the equivalent of what you would get if you were getting those benefits at their maximum level. But I think Sam is making a very, very important point here. So welfare is part of the answer for sure. But in 2 weeks' time at this NATO summit, this is a moment of real peril. Because I remember as Foreign Secretary, I went to the NATO summit in 2018 when Donald Trump nearly pulled America out of NATO. And, you know, in 2 weeks' time, you know, the Iran thing has not been a success for the United States. And if he's looking for a different kind of row, something about European allies not spending enough on defence would be exactly the kind of thing he might latch onto. So I think in this situation, it's very clear what has to happen. I think the Cabinet Secretary has to get the current Prime Minister and the person that we know is going to be the next Prime Minister in the room together to agree what the UK can announce. And it's absolutely essential that within the next 2 weeks those discussions happen. And that needs to be the minimum the UK will be putting on the table. I think that from the discussion I had last time I was on the sofa with you, what they're talking about isn't going to be enough anyway, and that they need to then look at welfare reform with a longer time frame to see how we could put even more.
But your welfare plan, it takes time to get those cuts that you're talking about, doesn't it? And, you know, the defence budget needs the money, you know, starting to roll now, doesn't it?
It does take time, but you can do it within the 5-year fiscal rule period, so that in terms of a budget and the Chancellor doing their numbers ahead of a budget, you can get the savings from welfare by the end of the period, which is the time you need it in order to spend money on defence.
Treasury trickery.
Well, it's actually the Treasury reality that you have to operate within.
Layla, you heard Jeremy there talking about a moment of peril. Your leader has been accused by John Healey of putting down NATO and imperiling national security. What do you say to that?
I fundamentally reject that. I think what's putting national security at risk is that we do not have enough defence capabilities to keep us safe, especially as the minister resigned as a result. And listen, I don't think the defence budget should swing depending on who's in number 10. It needs to be a long-term defence strategy, because defence is the first duty of any government, and we are woefully underfunded. And it doesn't seem like this government has any answers of how we are going to make up that funding. And that is a problem. Are we safe right now? Do we have the defence capabilities to keep us safe and to defend this nation? And I would expect the government to have a clear answer on that, and I don't think they do.
Were you a bit dismayed, though, when Nigel Farage said that, of course, the Ukraine war was Putin's fault, but he also said the expansion of the EU and NATO gave Putin a reason to tell the Russian people they're coming for us again? Were you a bit dismayed by what he said?
Nigel's been very clear that the mistake of this war, the fault of this war, lies solely at the door of Putin. That's it. You know.
But the expansion. When he talked about the expansion,
I mean, he was talking as in a general political commentary, you know, and he's been very clear since that, you know, this is Putin's war, and it's his fault.
Sam, just a sort of final reflection on where we sit with the defence investment plan. I mean, Jeremy's talking about getting everybody in a room, negotiating out. That's what will happen, isn't it?
Yeah, everybody's assuming that this is a row. And without wishing to be too boring about it, I haven't actually picked up big disagreements from the Burnham team about the approach. I think actually what's going on right now is that Keir Starmer is committed to a grown-up transfer of power, that Andy Burnham and his team knows that they need to be across stuff, but there's only so much they can do in the next couple of weeks. But as Jeremy says, it's a moment of peril, and that it is nobody's interest to have the UK trigger a conflict with the US or anybody else about defence spending. And so I think everybody's probably more on the same page on this. I actually think tonight there isn't a row. I think, however, the whole discussion about defence spending isn't settled.
Yeah.
It's something that Andy Burnham is going to have to take on when he becomes Prime Minister.
And there's a nervousness in the Burnham camp about how much has got to get sorted before he becomes Prime Minister.
I mean, the amount that they've got to do is enormous. When there's any mid-parliament transition of power, then the job is extraordinary. We don't know who the key people are. We don't know who the Chief of Staff are. We don't know the inclinations, really, of Andy Burnham. He could be somebody who is rolling back neoliberalism and basically a kind of an old-style socialist. He could be somebody who, as we saw in Manchester, basically is into growth and really injecting private investment into the whole of the British economy. We don't have a definition on the guy who's about to take over. We don't know his team. We don't know his priorities. There's a lot to find out about the man who's
It's as if
about
he was
to go
taken
in.
by surprise.
And Jeremy, as someone who was brought in, drafted in after the Trust debacle to try and steady the ship, and, you know, you saw how it was when someone wasn't elected. Rishi Sunak was brought in without an election. You know, how much of a moment of peril politically is this for Labour?
Well, it is obviously a very big moment because, you know, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and the things you do in those early months as a Prime Minister or a Chancellor are what everyone notices. But I think the thing that we now realise that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves did not realise is that the central trade-off is, do you do welfare reform or do you increase taxes? Because we are going to have to find more money for defence. Layla is absolutely right. We are not spending enough to keep the country safe. And in the end, no Prime Minister can duck that. And if they're not prepared to do welfare reform, and Andy Burnham has been very equivocal about whether he's really committed to welfare reform.
He said he's not squeamish about it.
He said he's not squeamish, but he also said, I don't think we should do anything that forces people to do something they don't want to do. And
like work.
Indeed, exactly right. But, you know, on the other hand, if you're going to raise tax, that hits growth. And you're going to hit, because, you know, you're going to be increasing business taxes. And there's a big call for a government, a new Labour Prime Minister, to do something that hits growth a third time after two budgets that have already done just that.
OK, well, Andy Burnham's path to Downing Street is sure to feature heavily on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Joining the panel to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be Aubrey Allegretti, the chief political correspondent of The Times, and former Conservative MP Theo Clarke. Well, now, one of the most vocal members of the Labour Party calling for Sir Keir Starmer's resignation was Welsh MP Alex Davies-Jones. The former Minister for Victims and Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls resigned after last month's Welsh Senedd and UK Council elections, saying the party needed bold and radical action. Well, as we know, those calls were answered, and a little earlier I spoke with Alex Davies-Jones about what's next for Labour. Alex Davies-Jones, you were backing Wes Streeting. You're now throwing your lot in with Andy Burnham, or are you disappointed that he's not standing?
I am disappointed Wes has decided not to contest the leadership election. I think we would have really benefited from having a contest, discussing and debating those ideas, getting some real policy and some meat out there to digest and to look at. But I think he's made the right decision. I think...
Well, he didn't have the numbers.
Well, I think he would have had the numbers, actually. There was a lot of people and a lot of support within the PLP for Wes and a lot of respect for him. But I think he recognised that Andy's win in Makerfield was so emphatic, that victory over reform, that message of hope, of unity, has really carried through. And what we need right now is to unite not just the party but the country, and to take that fight to reform and bring the radical change that we need as a government and as a party. And I am really, really excited about the prospect that a Prime Minister and Andy Burnham could bring.
Well, so you don't want Al Carnes or Darren Jones to stand? Has Darren canvassed you?
No, he hasn't. No, I haven't been approached by any other members of the PLP. I am backing Andy Burnham. I think he will be a uniting force and somebody who will bring that radical change and delivery that we so desperately need.
In the meantime, there hasn't been a coronation yet, and the Prime Minister still remains the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer is saying that he'll press ahead with the Defence Investment Plan. Is that the right decision, do you think, or should those kind of big decisions wait until a new Prime Minister gets in?
It's really difficult. We have been waiting so long for that Defence Investment Plan. I have businesses in my own constituency in Pontypridd who are desperate for this plan to come to fruition, businesses that are on the brink of collapse because we haven't had this plan going forward around how we're going to invest in defence. I've got members of the armed forces who are crying out for clarity and decisiveness, and we've been waiting far too long. However, I think, given that we've been waiting so long for this already, having the opportunity for a fresh Prime Minister to look at this with a fresh Chancellor potentially, to crunch those numbers again and to look at what are the priorities for the government and the country, I think is necessary. So I think publishing it and pushing ahead with it when it could be out of date by the time a new Prime Minister comes in is wrong. And I would urge caution on that.
So it's tying Andy Burnham's hands, potentially?
Yeah. And it's also not fair to our armed forces and our defence sector and our international partners, who we could be amending that in a couple of weeks. So that just shows instability at a time when we need stability the most.
And you talked about your businesses in your constituency wanting action and how long you've been delayed under this current Prime Minister. In your resignation letter, you resigned as a minister, and that's partly what precipitated, Keir Starmer's downfall, the ministers who resigned. You called in your resignation letter for bold, radical action. What kind of action do you want to see from Andy Burnham?
I want to see those decisions that were not taken by the Prime Minister carried out. So I want to see proper welfare reform being undertaken for the benefit of our young people in our country, not just to save money, although of course that will be a net benefit, but to actually tackle the serious problem that we are abandoning generations of young people to a lifetime on benefits because we're not investing in them. I want to see proper devolution settlements and proper representation of our regions and our nations. I represent a seat in Wales which absolutely my party got annihilated in the Senedd elections just in May. That is devastating. We have nationalists in every corner of the United Kingdom. We have to take that fight to them and show that it is Labour that is the progressive choice in government, that we are the people speaking up for our communities and delivering on some of those difficult choices, whether that be as well bringing forward the Hillsborough Law, the Public Office Accountability Bill that I was working on that we just couldn't get over the line because decisions couldn't be made, whether that be on that Defence Investment Plan, whether that be on those difficult choices on tech regulation, looking at how we can keep people safe online, for example. All of these things I desperately want to see, and I desperately want to see prioritised.
I wonder how confident you can be in Andy Burnham, given that he's blown hot and cold on something like welfare reform, for example. So how much can you believe what he says now that he will actually, grasp the nettle of that?
I think he's got a great opportunity here to unite the Parliamentary Labour Party and to listen to that breadth of expertise that's within the party, within MPs here in Westminster, from different regions, different corners of the United Kingdom, to find out exactly what is needed in our backyard. He is now a constituency MP as well, let's not forget. So he brings with him that voice and that urgency from his own seat in Makerfield. There is a very diverse community who are wanting action on some of these radical issues, and that's what I'd be pushing him for.
And does that mean, when you talk about uniting the party, does that mean appointing someone like Wes Streeting as Chancellor?
Look, this will be a decision for whoever the leader is. But what I would like to see is the breadth of talent, a breadth of expertise across the party represented in that cabinet, not just for the sake of party unity, but I think for the sake of the country, so that we bring everybody together to really deliver on our manifesto commitments on what the country needs.
Do you think Wes Streeting would make a good Chancellor?
I do. I think he would. I think he would be any asset to a cabinet. I think that level of talent, not just from a political point of view, but from a communications point of view, he's one of our most expert communicators in terms of getting messaging across there, and it would be a huge, huge miss to not have him at the top table.
Yeah, but he might be an expert communicator, but can he read a balance sheet?
I mean, he's done exceptionally well when he was Health Secretary, looking at how we get to grips with our NHS, make it fit for purpose, really bring down those waiting lists. That was all down to Wes and testimony to him in terms of driving that forward and ensuring that we got value for money in our NHS, and we made it work again.
Yeah, but what are his economic credentials for being Chancellor?
Well, he has obviously got economic background. He outlined in a speech just this week sort of his economic credentials, his plan on progressive socialism, on pushing forward on how he would tackle some of the challenges challenges we've got regarding capital gains tax, for example, and how we make it equitable and fair in the country, and how we really look at that redistribution of wealth that we need.
So how important is it to reassure the city, reassure business that there is this diversity of talent, as you put it, and people from the right of the party, particularly on that economic, in the economic sector?
I think it's vitally important that we reassure the markets. We've seen what happens when the markets are spooked or feel a lack of confidence in government. You know, we only have to hark back to the era of Liz Truss to think about what happened when budgets and chancellors were put in post without any market confidence, and the impact that has on people's pockets. You know, mortgages went through the roof, people's cost of living dramatically increased, and it was a problem. So that is important, that we have that market confidence and that we give the city and the bond markets the confidence that we do know what we're doing.
So a new Prime Minister is only ever one bad move away from a sort of Liz Truss moment, really?
Of course they are. Of course, and sadly we saw that with Keir Starmer and some of the decisions that he made that has led to, sadly, his resignation.
As you were Violence Against Women Minister, Equalities Minister, you and a survivor of Epstein, Lisa Phillips, are going in to meet Darren Jones today. What will you be asking him for?
We want some honesty. We want some transparency around how Peter Mandelson and the appointment, I mean, all of this has been discussed around that, but it's around what can we do now going forward? I think Lisa Phillips has been a tremendously brave advocate, speaking out about the horrific abuse that she suffered at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And she is looking for justice. She wants truth, accountability, and moving forward, we want answers, and the survivors want answers. It's not just Lisa Phillips. She is speaking on behalf of an array of British victims here, many of whom are dotted around the world, but who are unable to come to Westminster. So Lisa's speaking on behalf of them. In France, for example, in the Chief Prosecutor's Office, they've set up a dedicated unit investigating these crimes specifically. I am asking the Attorney General for that here in the UK. I think we need that specialist team because the Met have shown that, sadly, they are reluctant to push forward with the investigation. I mean, it is happening, but it is painfully slow. And there's such a lack of trust and confidence in the Met Police and the police here, given how potentially caught up in Jeffrey Epstein's activities they were. You know, these powerful institutions that were meant to support victims and survivors have let them down repeatedly. And therefore, I think a standalone unit looking and investigating these, you know, independently is what's needed.
And of course, Peter Mandelson was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein's, then became ambassador, and obviously we know the problems that caused for Keir Starmer. But Darren Jones, also Chief Secretary to the Treasury, he was close to Peter Mandelson. What are you going to be asking him?
Well, I've had many a frank personal conversation with Darren Jones about his relationship with Peter Mandelson, and I will respect that confidence of not talking publicly about that. But I have known Darren a very long time, and I take him for his word when he says how personally disappointed he was and shocked and disgusted by what has now become apparent regarding what was known regarding Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
But, you know, we saw the cosy text messages between Darren Jones and Peter Mandelson.
Look, I have had that conversation with Darren. I've spoken to him about those messages that he exchanged with Peter Mandelson, and I take him for his word when he says how sorry he is that has all happened. And he is meeting with the survivors still today, and I am grateful to him for that. And I'm sure they will want answers from him and want to hear directly from him about his potential involvement or what he knows and how he can help them, first and foremost, with a potential inquiry or this special investigations unit.
Lisa Phillips had asked for a meeting with the Prime Minister to look at setting up a public inquiry, and Keir Starmer pushed her off to his underling. Are you disappointed in that?
I am disappointed that he has not taken the time to meet with Lisa, and he has not reached out a hand to meet with her and the other victims. I know that Andy Burnham and his team have reached out to Lisa and would like to speak to her, as has West Streeting, as has Al Khan's, for example. So there are many people willing to help and see the benefit in actually standing up for the victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein.
Alex Davies-Jones, we couldn't bring the sofa out here, but it's great to have you on the bench by the River Thames.
In the sunshine. Thank you.
Well, now, if the fall of a Prime Minister causes disruption for political journalists, it's just as much of a pain for comedians and impressionists. All that hard work, nailing a politician's mannerisms, thrown into the dustbin of history. But fortunately, the nation's best comics talents are already hard at work.
OK, here's a quick guide to doing an Andy Burnham impression. It's quite a gentle voice, so dial back on the scouse a little bit, middle of the skull, and quite softly spoken, bit nasally, but not too much. And as he goes along, he will ask himself questions, won't he? And you'll notice that a lot, won't you? And it can sound quite consensual because he's trying to bring people into the conversation, isn't he? But it can also sound a little bit unsure or uncertain, can't it? So look out for that. Black shirt, glasses, and then pivot very quickly from levity to seriousness. Look, there's nothing I love more than going down the hill, Dickie, with the lads and, you know, having a few beers and seeing the toffees and then getting a kebab. But in all seriousness, if Iran don't stop what they're doing, we will launch a nuclear attack, won't we?
Well, comedian and impressionist Matt Ford, who you saw there, is on the sofa with Jeremy and Layla. I mean, Matt, just if I close my eyes, I thought that was Andy Burnham speaking. So, I mean, is he a gift to impressionists, or are you just very clever?
Well, crikey, that's a very kind question. Thank you. I think I've watched him for a few years, and he's always had that kind of nice sound. You know, it's from the northwest. It's not too Liverpool, and I think a lot of it is just getting the vibe, Cathy, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and
It's all about the vibes.
Vibe is a lot of it. You know, you get the kind of essence of someone, and you notice the kind of things that they repeat in their language and the way they construct sentences. And I think that questioning at the end of sentences is something that I've not seen many other politicians doing. It's a real Andy Burnham thing. And
Yeah, and I hadn't noticed it at all
you know?
until he pointed it out. And it is part of his sort of communication style and just making people feel included, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, obviously, it can be, as I sort of say in the clip, you know, it's on one hand it sounds consensual, at other times it sounds slightly unsure. And if you compare it to Tony Blair, where the endings, by the way, Cathy, were always very clear. You know, it's wrong, and frankly, we would never stand up for that.
Well, you've got Jeremy Hunt on the sofa next to you. Can you do a Jeremy impression?
Not really. I mean, I can do sort of... You know, David Cameron was as close as I got. I bloody well do respect Jeremy, by the way.
That sounds quite Boris, that, though.
But, you know, they're all kind of in a... We've had so many prime ministers from
the Tory voice.
sort of one area.
The Tory voice.
Right,
It's the Tory voice. Yeah, that's
Come on, Cathy. I mean, what is this? And I don't for a second believe... What was his Sky News Channel 4? The bloody... troublemaking...
You're on Sky now, by the way.
Sky News.
Right.
Always with the facts, and they didn't help when I stood against you. So, look, come on. I do think I sound like David Cameron.
But what about Keir? Are you going to miss him? Starmer, I should say.
Of course I want to pay tribute. And that was something that Keir did. There'd be like little repeats within sentences.
Yeah.
Of course I want to pay tribute.
And the neck as well, you got the neck.
Very upright, the hand always there. Of course I want to pay tribute. To the fantastic wedding you did, a public servant, very important that we do say that. And you were sort of never quite sure when the sentence was going to end, sort of accordion out. And again, those things feel like signs of nerves, that there's not that definite end. Because the thoughts aren't necessarily clear before the sentence has started, I think, sometimes.
I mean, Jeremy, you have to hand it to him. The Boris impression was absolutely spot on, wasn't it?
Absolutely brilliant.
I don't know if this is triggering.
He is brilliant. And I'm just so relieved that he's... I'm apparently quite a difficult person to impersonate, and I don't quite know why.
I don't know what to read into that.
There's a lightness in there, Jeremy. I could do a kind of boilerplate Jeremy Hunt. You know, I did try and tell the Tory party at the time.
What about Layla's sitting on the end of the sofa, so what about Nigel Farage?
Well, I got to tell you, you've got to get that deep. And I find it quite hard. He's got a sort of tobacco-y resonance at the bottom.
You need to smoke a bit more.
Yeah, and a lot of that. Arms up like that. Well, no. He's always absolutely clear. But there's nothing going on. I don't know why people keep asking about it.
You going to ask her about the £5 million gift?
Well, look, Cathy, I mean, every single person... The public do not care. Apart from the 55 million people that do care, nobody cares.
Layla, do you want to come back on that?
You don't really sound like him.
Inimitable.
Yeah.
Inimitable.
Yeah. I mean,
unique.
Political impressions do help sort of shape what people think about politicians, don't they?
I think you're picking up on something that maybe like political analysis doesn't always pick up on, that there's a comedic side. In a way, you're seeing them like characters, and you have to resonate in terms of how they sound and how they behave. But you're also hitting upon a sort of personality trait that obviously will inform their politics. You know, if some people are more confident, if some people are more forthright, if people are bluffing. So all these things are insights into the person.
Well, you do have insights into all of these people because you interview them as well. I mean, I'm sort of rolling around laughing at your impressions, but you do have a sort of serious job to do. You interviewed Keir Starmer, didn't you, on stage? And actually, you sort of got him laughing along with you about Macron, French president, obviously had just been to Davos and worn those sunglasses, hadn't he? And you got a laugh out of Keir Starmer on that. So you found a sense of humour that some haven't.
I think sometimes you've got to... You don't tip them off if you're going to do something. I think because a politician will instinctively say, I don't want to do that, I don't want to be disrespectful. So Macron had obviously turned up at Davos in those aviators. I just bought a pair off Amazon for £10 and just thought, I'll get them out in the interview. It felt fairly low risk. He can either put them on or not. I was kind of surprised that he did put them on.
Yeah, he
and then
played
someone
along,
caught it on
didn't he?
camera and it was quite a funny moment.
Well, now you're taking your political show to Edinburgh, aren't you, to the Fringe?
Yes.
What's in store there? Or is it not the Fringe? Yeah, it is the Fringe.
It is the Fringe, yeah. It's Project Holy Moly, which is a brand new hour of political comedy and impressions, which obviously I've had to start rewriting this week now that we're going to have a new Prime Minister. So
yeah,
I just enjoy the challenge of it, and I try and pack them all in. There's always lots of domestic politicians and Donald Trump. Oh, I noticed,
yes,
Cathy, you didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I think it's very sad what you're doing here today. I think it's actually pathetic. And your viewers, your numbers are going down the tubes. And you're part of the fake news media. And I think it's very sad. Probably the saddest thing that's ever happened.
I mean, I'm laughing so hard you're giving me an asthma attack. I mean, you actually... You've got it.
I think asthma can be very bad. I don't believe asthma.
Can I say, listen, what I want to hear is those interviews for Chancellor. I'm speaking as a former Chancellor. So you've got Ed Miliband and Wes Streeting, and they are both doing their pitch to Andy Burnham. So tell me what the conversation, how it goes.
Unfortunately, you don't have time to answer that question because I want you to say goodbye as Andy Burnham on behalf of the show. So go ahead.
Well, look, I think it's been a great show, Cathy, and I think people would agree with that one day, and Cathy will be back tomorrow at 7, you know, if we can agree to that. And, you know, we'll see you then, won't we?
Yeah. Well, I think so. I can't really say any better than that.
Who knows?
Thank you to you. Thank you to my lovely sofa duo. It was fantastic to hear from you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.